the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
He is great.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Wednesday. We have a good show on tap for you. We're going to kind of split the show in half because our guest this morning can only stay through the first half hour because she has to get to court, and so we can't get in the way of that. I'll introduce you to her in a moment, but stick around because coming in the second half hour, we're going to have Leland joining us from over in the Weather Center along with Rebecca. They're going to be talking about more on the preps, weather, and everything else with what's happening with the NFL draft starting tomorrow. And you can ask questions of them. I've got some questions for the two of them as they've been following this. So stick around through the whole program. But this morning, we're going to be talking about a subject that's been discussed on the show before. I don't think we can do it enough. It's the issue of human sex trafficking and the problem, and it's right under our nose, as we've learned from many of the folks who have been getting the word out about this. And this morning, we're going to have someone on the front lines of battling this. Sara Beth Myers is with us. She is with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Good morning to you, ma'am.
Good morning.
You are the Human Trafficking Coordinator. You are an Assistant U.S. Attorney.
That's correct.
So this means you prosecute these folks.
That's right.
You go after them. And if the feds are after you, you're in trouble. They get you and you go away for a long time. I wanted to ask you, you coming on this morning, the issue of human trafficking and how it squares with prostitution. They're not one and the same, are they?
They're not. So prostitution is typically prosecuted at the state level. There's no federal nexus to prosecute prostitution. And those are a series of one-off incidents, whereas involving an individual, and it can involve somebody in any age, but with human trafficking, what we look at is there the presence of force, fraud, or coercion? And especially when it involves a minor, and especially when there is that interstate nexus.
All right, the force. So give me an example, for instance, and when you, especially with minors, which are the worst case scenarios, this would be, as we've heard, maybe a woman that's been misled, kidnapped, and what are the scenarios?
So there are a number of scenarios. The most obvious would be someone holding a gun to your head, and I think that that's typically what people think of, but that's unfortunate because usually it's much more subtle than that. And that would involve holding somebody's documents, not feeding a person, not allowing a person to leave a particular area, controlling all of their access to the outside world, but doing that in a very subtle way.
Okay, and the people doing this would be their pimps.
Correct, yes.
Okay, so they've got them, and meaning that they're structuring their lives. They live in a place that their handler says this is where you're going to stay, and they're delivered to wherever their johns are. Is that how this works? That's
right, and oftentimes drugs are involved as well.
Okay, right.
They typically serve as more of a numbing agent for a person, especially with people who, obviously, people don't want to go into prostitution. People don't oftentimes even realize that they're victims of human trafficking because they may be in love with the person who is trafficking them. And it's a very complex relationship. They may truly believe that that person is doing what's best for them. And if they're in a vulnerable position, such as a person under the age of 18 or a person who may not be in this country legally, then that person who is controlling them controls their access to everything and may reward them with drugs, and that person may take the drugs as a numbing effect because of what they're doing with their own bodies. They need to numb themselves from the effect of what's happening to them.
All right, so prostitution, as they say, the world's oldest profession, okay, been around. All right, the idea of human trafficking in connection with this, to me, has only become something that's on the public forefront over the past several years. Before that, and I assume it's been going on all along, the human trafficking aspect, but I think a vast majority of people out there had no idea that it was something this organized and this controlling of the women that are involved. Or men in some cases, I suppose.
Yes, it involves both men and women, people of every single age. So there are just a select few signs that we are asking people to look for as part of a coordinated campaign that we have started with local, state, and federal law enforcement. And that's the Eyes Up Nashville campaign. And
I've been to the website. It's good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That was designed by our TBI counterparts. And it's really important to understand what those signs signs of human trafficking are, because usually you'll interact with someone who's being trafficked in a very limited set of time. So it may just be a couple of minutes that you interact with a person. And when you only have a couple of minutes to interact with someone, you look for certain things such as, are they a minor traveling with an older adult? Is that person, do they seem related or not? Is that person fearful or anxious in any way, in an unusual way? Are they being controlled by the other person, meaning do they seem subordinate to the other person? Are they allowed to speak? Is that other person controlling their actions? So looking for things like that, that you may find odd anyway, but you may just kind of brush it off as, this is something that, that must be a strange relationship.
Where the heck am I going to run into someone like this myself? I mean, am I going to observe this at a grocery store? Where am I going to see this? Where are you going to see this?
Possibly, but in areas where a lot of traveling is occurring. So, for example, like you're in a bus station, or you're waiting for that Uber, and you are surrounded by a crowd, in the road. You're sharing transportation with somebody else. You're in a hotel lobby. Any time that there is a public place where there is an increased volume of people from all over the world, and Nashville is a very popular tourist destination, and as you know, we're about to have this huge historic influx of people in the city. And so with that, in those large public places, and that could be you're at a concert, and people are walking through, and you observe odd behavior. Someone who is not allowed to speak for herself, something like that. Someone is always doing the speaking for that person, or someone is controlling their money.
And you're saying if you observe this and it just hits you as, not quite right, you should call who?
The Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline.
Okay, but at that moment, in that microcosm, I mean, if I call it and I see it in a hotel lobby, I'll call it. You guys can't rush over there right off the bat. What, am I supposed to take a picture of them? I mean, they're going to be gone. Realistically, tips like what you're suggesting, if I were to make the call in, how often does that actually lead to an arrest?
So you'd be surprised how often it actually does lead to an arrest. There are an influx of tips like that, but due to the surge that is going to be in Nashville, all of these people who are descending on the city, both for the NFL draft, the marathon, the number of concerts that are going on at the same time, there's also a surge of law enforcement. So there is increased law enforcement presence, and that includes people monitoring the human trafficking hotline. And we're lucky in this state in that we have our own state hotline, and we're encouraging people to call that. But if it's an emergency, of course, call 911. If you see somebody being abused right in front of you, someone is being assaulted, or something strikes you as those people are going to leave, I'm not going to be able to keep an eye on them while I make this tip, while I make this report, call 911 instead. But that's more for emergencies. So for the tip, if you see something and it looks like they've set up shop in a lobby for a while, they're waiting maybe for a bus, they're waiting for a train, that's a great opportunity to call the hotline, which is 1-855-55-TNHTH.
We'll put that up again before this segment ends. I just wanted to hit a little bit more about when you have some big activity going on in the city. So obviously this weekend is going to be really busy, starting tomorrow. Why is it that we'll see a spike, and what is it the U.S. Attorney is doing special in reaction to this?
We have been meeting with local, state, federal law enforcement, and we've convened the first human trafficking community campaign. So it doesn't just involve law enforcement. We need eyes and ears on the ground in the Nashville community. So we've involved the Convention Center and Visitors Bureau, and we have involved a number of local nonprofits here locally. And so local, state, and federal nonprofits as well. So the advantage to that is we have eyes and ears on the ground, and members of the hospitality industry have now been trained, both with the Eyes Up Nashville program and through the TBI resources, to look for these very specific 5 signs.
And you think there's no doubt that there is going to be a spike locally because of this? I mean, this happens all the time, but you just have so many people coming from outside the area at once.
Right, there are so many people coming to the area that there most likely will be an increase in that activity. And as a result of that, we have to be prepared to meet that increased demand.
Do you believe human traffickers, seeing that, okay, there's going to be a bunch of tourists and a lot of people in Nashville this weekend, they may be in another state or in another part of this state, decide to bring their women or whoever with them here to provide to take advantage of the crowd?
Quite possibly. It's a supply and demand business, right?
Right.
So. And because of that, because we're going to have this huge influx of people, and it's predominantly male-driven on the demand side, so the supply will most likely increase to meet that demand. But it's not just people coming in, it's people who are already here. It's people who live here and are being trafficked in our midst every single day. So with that combination and with this opportunity, this really is an opportunity for us to raise the profile of human trafficking in Nashville and to make sure that people understand what to look for. So even though whether or not there is in fact a surge, it's an opportunity to draw attention to an issue that is among us every single day and that we may just miss.
We'll take a break. When we come back, it's going to be our final segment with you, and I cut you off before you were able to go into those 5 points to look for. Let's talk about that. We'll continue our conversation with our guest from the U.S. Attorney's Office on a really important topic right after this. Stay with us.